Hey, welcome on in, everybody. We're going to give everyone a few minutes to join in before we get started with today's webinar. So let's just give it a minute or two. All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome. We're just going to allow people to keep trickling in as we get started here. Just want to say thank you so much for joining us today. This is a virtual event celebrating the publication of Transformative Change through Educational Leadership. I'm really excited to be here with you all, and in just a few moments, we will be hearing from the editor of this book, Kenneth MacKinnon, who is joined by some of the contributors of this fabulous collection, and we are very, very grateful to have them all here with us today. I just want to mention that we also have a discount code available, as you can see here on the bottom left-hand side of your screen. It is TCEL2K24, and this will give you 20% off any purchase made on our Canadian Scholars website, and it is available for use up until December 28th, 2024. We do encourage you to take advantage of this great discount available. We will be taking any questions from our audience at the end of the presentation, so please feel free to use the question and answer function through Zoom. There should be a Q&A button located at the bottom of your screen, and you may submit questions anytime during this presentation. Please note that you can also submit questions anonymously if you wish to do so. So lastly, before I turn things over to Ken, I would also like to mention that this webinar will be recorded and emailed out to all who registered in the next few coming days. We will also be giving away 2 copies of the books to attendees who will be contacted after this launch. So without further ado, let's begin. Please welcome Ken.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming and joining us this afternoon. Very much appreciate it. So I'm just going to share my screen here. Sorry, everyone. Wrong one. 1 second. Can this be seen? Yeah, okay. My apologies for that, everyone. Okay, so welcome. Thank you for coming. My name is Kenneth MacKinnon. I'm the editor of this text, and I'm so pleased to be joined by many of the wonderful authors of chapters in this book. We are so proud of our collection and how we've shared our thoughts in transformative change through educational leadership, stories, models, and wonderings. I just wanted to acknowledge the land upon which I am settled. I want to pay respect to the Mi'kmaq people of Abegweit and Mi'kma'ki. It's the land upon which I work and live, and I acknowledge that Mi'kma'ki is the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people who in 1725 first signed the Treaty of Peace and Friendship with the British Crown. So I acknowledge and extend my respect for all Indigenous peoples who are living on this land, past and present, and I'm committed to seeking justice for all in my everyday decisions, teaching and scholarship. Um, and I like to share this now, as I feel that it's very, very important that we are acknowledging the land, but also taking up a stance of learning in every step that we take, and also challenging the assumptions that we make as settlers on this land. So I wanted to talk briefly about really what inspired this book. Um, one of the things that I kept thinking about is I was a principal in school for, I've lost count of the years. It was many years. And often I would talk to teachers who I thought would make a great leader in the school, and they just didn't seem so inspired. So I wanted to inspire people to leadership, is one of the reasons I sort of started working on this project. And also, but part of that is also to acknowledge the challenges that exist within school leadership and educational leadership generally. But challenges are not without possibilities. So there are many possibilities to challenge within leadership, and we wanted to address that as well in the book. And we thought it was really important to share stories surrounding the power of educational leadership to transform, to make things better, and that there is space for all of us who wish to lead to actually lead. The book is divided into 6 sections. So the first section is titled School Leadership Identities, where we focus on a growing sense of leadership identity and efficacy and how you can build that. We explore ways in which Indigenous leadership is made visible, um, and we recognize the leader within through story. So we felt that these are 3 different ways in which we explore leadership identity. The second section of the book, Building Relationships to Lead Transformative Change, it sort of asks, what does it mean to lead transformatively alongside others? So we know that principals and other educational leaders do not lead alone. So what does that look like? How do you create change alongside others? How do you learn to build relationships through critical hope, reflexive and courageous practice? We know that leadership requires courage, and so we explore what that looks like. And finally, building a holistic approach to leadership, where we see the many factors which come into play, presenting a model for leadership that can be employed within educational spaces. The third is Students at the Center, a reminder why we are in this work, why we lead in education. So developing a deep and reflexive practice in order to lead transformatively is so important in centering students. Exploring destreaming through student-centered lens, destreaming being a very critical and important issue in our schools across the country. And centering students during school improvement planning is another area that we explore. We often forget about that student voice, which is also important. Connecting with parents, caregivers, and community, we explore an anti-oppressive approach to parent engagement and what that can look like. Building empathy and understanding through duoethnography. We explore this as a way for leaders within school systems and spaces to build greater empathy and understanding amongst community. And exploring the story of indigenization and decolonization within a community in the west coast of Canada around community engagement. In the next section, supporting wellness and well-being, ever since, well, even prior to the pandemic, but the pandemic certainly highlighted this as a very desperate need in school systems and education systems across the country. We explore what it means to be resilient amongst educators. We explore a decolonized holistic approach to supporting teacher wellness, a different view of how we can support teachers and their wellness so that they can be present for students. And we explore also a very specific model for principals to enact well-being practice, which we felt is something that hasn't been discussed enough. Sorry, everyone. And finally, in the last section, we discuss what it means to make space for all who wish to lead. What does it mean for queer educational leadership? What does it mean to lead as a queer person? The story of one Indigenous woman's leadership journey is shared in this section of the book. And finally, we explore what it means to lead with your whole self, coming full circle back from the beginning, where we start to recognize ourselves as leaders. So thank you so much for listening. I will pass it on to our next speaker.
That would be me, correct?
Sorry, I'm having trouble.
Yep, that's correct.
How do I? Sorry, everyone. I'm having trouble with my computer too. Oh, here we go. Okay. There we go. My apologies.
That's all right, Ken.
Can everyone hear me? Yes, sorry about that. I had to unmute myself. Just transitioning. Tanzi, good morning, everyone. My name is Chaz Desjardins, and I'm going to be speaking to Chapter 2, Matriarchs in the Making. And this was a collection of 3 Indigenous women working together, writing really our story work and our journeys in leadership. And what does it mean for Indigenous women in leadership? So I'd like to raise my hands to Jenna Fox and Carolyn Roberts in sharing their understanding of holistic, relational, and community-based leadership from an Indigenous woman's perspective. So I'd like to just begin with the land acknowledgement. Am I on the land acknowledgement slide? Oh, I was on the title slide. Can you see that one now? Sorry, I've got 2 slides up here. I'd like to begin by following protocol, and it's with deep gratitude and respect that I'm honored to be learning and unlearning on the ancestral and unceded lands of the Skokomish, or the Hamathwim, Skokomish, Okomeo, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. And with that, I raise my hands and thanks for being able to do the good work that I'm able to do as an educational leadership within the Vancouver School District. So who am I and where do I come from? And we talk about identity as Indigenous leaderships. Our identities are a big part of our leadership pathway. As I said earlier, my name is Chaz Desjardins. My traditional name is Kaminisu Kamawat Bisuwat, which translates from Nihio Weeman into English as Helper of Thunderbirds. I'm the daughter of the late Robert Edmund Desjardins Nahel Michif, and the daughter of Diane Lorraine Johnson, whose settler ancestries English, French, and Spanish. I'm a citizen of the Cold Lake First Nations, Treaty 6 Esqueo, and a proud mother of 2 young daughters, my oldest being 19 and my youngest being 12. I'm an auntie, a cousin, a sister, a daughter, a granddaughter, and a matriarch in the making. And much of the story work from the chapter talks about, what does it mean to be a matriarch in the making within our own leadership, and how are we rematriating our leadership. Indigenous women leaders honor their holism, and they do that through their culture, embodying their cultural practices, and also being in ceremony. So they take all those ceremonial practices and they bring them into their leadership. And essentially these teachings kind of help us find our gifts in our leadership, and really provide us some with strength as we work through our leadership. So leading in Western colonial systems is really about leading in the liminal space. And for Indigenous women and the shared collective voices of the 2 other women that I was privileged right alongside with, this being in these spaces for Indigenous women creates dissonance. The experience, because of the hierarchical, transactional, and individualistic and competitive notion of leadership from a Western worldview, is really kind of counter to how Indigenous women understand themselves, living in this world, but also living their leadership, which is embodied. And so the experience of Indigenous women in leadership from, I speak to my own doctoral work, which was woven into this chapter. Indigenous women experience loneliness, alienation. It's often very disorienting and fraught with danger in the systems that they lead in. I talk about rematriating as a concept of our leadership, and Carolyn and Jana and I have had conversations face to face about what that actually means for us as Indigenous women. And Indigenous women leaders, they are matriarchs in the making. Many of us come from matrilineal lineages. So with that, we're bringing our whole self. So that concept of holism, holistic leadership is really emerging from, it's an emerging field of scholarly work. And will continue to emerge as more Indigenous women enter in doctoral work, PhD work. So our leadership as values are grounded in our culture teachings, as you shared earlier, and our language of our ancestors. So we embody our leadership. We live it every day. We live it in accordance of who we are and where we come from. So I come from the prairies. My teachings are going to be grounded. The values and the natural laws from my people are going to be woven into my leadership. Those two things are not separate. And as Indigenous women, our sovereign bodies in the spaces that the colonial spaces that we're in, the patriarchal spaces that we're in, are currently disrupting and challenging the dominant theories and styles of Western leadership. So where does that take us? Past, present, and future. As current Indigenous women leaders and also Indigenous males and diverse Indigenous identities, we honor the leaders who have blazed the path for us to follow. And so with that, as matriarchs, we understand that we must never forget who we are and where we come from, when we're in the system, and who are we serving? Who are we in service to? Collectively, we are stronger as a family, as a kin network. That's how we see each other. We always, when we come together as Indigenous leaders, we see each other as family. So those coming into leadership need to know, and especially those who are Indigenous, need to understand that they are not alone. And sometimes it often is, you're often one of in systems, whether it's in British Columbia or across the country nationally or internationally. You have to gather up that strength to be to have the courage to take up space not afforded for us because we're marginalized in systems. And essentially, you know, it goes back to who are we in service to? Well, our children, first and foremost. Our children need our voices in these spaces. They need us seeing us leading in these systems and structures that weren't really built for us to be successful. Yet we still here because we're so thriving in our current systems. So that leads me to the end. Thank you for listening. I hope you take, there's some takeaways for you, and thank you for being engaged.
Oh, sorry, that leads into Bonnie and I next. And first, I just want to say thank you to Shaz, Carolyn, and Shar for sharing their journeys and finding their leadership. Bonnie and I will be speaking next. We'll introduce ourselves, but we're going to be speaking about an opportunity and a process that gave us space to develop our leader identities. So my name is Sarah Hamilton. I'm an assistant professor at Mount Royal University here in Calgary, where it's very cold right now. And just, oh, Bonnie, you're on mute.
All right, I'll never ever get used to unmuting. I'm Bonnie Caldwell, and I'm a former school principal as well as a doctoral candidate here in Calgary and a university sessional instructor.
So before we start getting into our talk, we just wanted to offer a series of questions that actually came at the end of our chapter that we sort of provided for folks to think about when you're considering your own leader identity, leadership identity, and ways in which you are looking to develop these and moving forward in your leadership journey. Our work really came from a place where we started both personally as well as looking at the literature on what was happening for professional development and professional learning for school leaders. We know that school leadership is a significant and one of the primary contributing factors to student learning and achievement. However, what we have noticed and what we experienced ourselves was our own professional development and learning was often overlooked, or even sometimes we would say neglected. We were leading the learning for others in our schools, and our own learning was not being developed in the same way. Opportunities that did come up were sometimes sporadic, or a one-day workshop, a conference, but more often they were and not really focused on what we personally needed in that work. We also saw, and through experience and again in the literature, that there were a number of school leaders that were starting to look at professional learning networks for ways in which they might develop and improve education and opportunities within their schools, but also how they might develop the learning for themselves. And as a group, we got together with some other newly appointed school leaders and actually worked hand in hand with one of our great mentors and friends, Dr. Pam Adams at the University of Lethbridge. And this led to the creation of what we refer to as the Leaders of Learning Network. The Leaders of Learning Network looked at sort of a nexus of three concepts that we know have a great deal to play in school leadership and professional learning in particular. So we looked at the role of instructional leadership. How does that align then with ideas like self-efficacy and leader efficacy? And what does it mean to develop those? And as well, we looked at an inquiry-based growth model. And so we aligned much of these meetings and the structures of this with characteristics that we had already seen that we knew were proven to engage in effective professional development. So we looked at ideas like active learning. We were meeting monthly, and we would make commitments, 30-day commitments in between this, and we were active in those commitments. This was a collaborative, safe space for us to get together. We had authentic conversations. They were really focused on a lot of reflection, feedback from others, but even more so reflecting on our own selves and our own learning. It was specifically designed around goals and evidence gathering that led us to understand if we were moving forward with our goals. As we mentioned before, it was done with inquiry cycles, so professional inquiry cycles, and we had that sustained focus throughout the year and into actually multiple years. And we used a model of generative dialogue for this, where we were really engaging in conversations that were open-ended questions that asked us to think about what we were doing. So these key processes and structures in this model, again, it was grounded in our personal professional practice. So we each had our goals that we were looking to move forward with. And our generative dialogue process actually involved what we would refer to as our triads. So we had three of us engaging in these processes together, where one person was the questioner, asking those deep, open-ended, probing questions. There was another individual who would be answering these based on looking at their goals, the evidence that they had gathered, and what that evidence was telling them. And a third person who was actually not participating in the conversation, but made notes throughout this. And at the end of it, provided a summary back to the other two so that they could then think on that and reflect on what was learned throughout. This was sustained. And it was an iterative process. So we often almost deconstructed and then reconstructed our thinking and our goals. And Again, using that evidence to guide our decisions. So we weren't looking at sort of just I feel or I think, but this is what this was telling me. And so these were the decisions we were going to make moving forward as we look to gain it or to move forward with our goals.
And we included in our chapter a critical understanding of what was emerging within our network. We pondered the concepts of leadership identity versus that leader identity, and realized some of our growth in leadership was tied to our growth in our own leader identity. Leadership identity became the we of our construct, our identity within that social dynamic, whereas our leader identity was an I construct, a sense of who I am as a leader. And according to the literature, professional identity can be consciously transformed as a result of learning processes and reflections about oneself. And the learning of leaders network, the participants focused on this transformation, particularly when we became cognizant when our own leadership identity and leader identity sometimes didn't align. And so who was I expected to be or perceived to be as a leader, as opposed to who I was authentically as a leader? And as one of the leaders of Learning Network participants articulated in this tension, she stated, I feel I'm not my authentic self because my supervisor has expectations and I don't think I'm comfortable enough to lead how I really want to. So I'm doing what is expected and not being my true self as a leader. So that was a bit of a discussion as well, and a bit of our learning as well. And then, we went on to understand in that leader identity, Sarah, do you want to skip to the next? Thanks. That traditional leadership professional learning typically addresses the overall leadership competencies, the responsibilities, and sometimes the managerial priorities required as a school leader, as a principal. And of course, our graduate courses support that theoretical understanding and underpinnings of what leadership is. But what the network provided was an opportunity to deconstruct leadership and to focus on that professional, personal growth of the participant's identity as a leader and within the context of each participant's leadership. So what the participants felt was that the network was supportive and transformative through an identity-based, multi-domain approach to leadership development. And finally, we share about self-efficacy in our chapter because we know leaders with a strong sense of identity will be more confident and feel more confident and be consistent in their actions. So leaders with a developing or developed identity will be more likely to seek out experiences to enact leadership and more motivated to continue to grow their leader self-efficacy, which is always a requirement for effective leadership. Leader self-efficacy is crucial as it increases the motivation and perseverance a leader has in facing challenging situations. And as a former principal, there wasn't a minute in my day that I didn't find in some capacity a bit of a challenge. We observe our Leaders of Learning Network participants' growth in their self-efficacy through their 30-day commitment to their actions and their increasing confidence and willingness to work through many of the challenges that they faced each day. One participant reflected that she felt the Leaders of Learning professional network and the professional learning was actioned every day as she grew strong in her own leader identity, and thus her leadership grew stronger. So our chapter really shares about how transformational leadership can be fostered through effective, collaborative professional learning experiences. And I think that's it for us.
Thanks, everybody. So, hi, I'm Ellie Weisdorf, and I'm here with Jordan Rappaport, and we are the authors of Chapter 8, Disrupting a Streaming Structure in Elementary Special Education. A little bit about me. For several years, I was working as a regional elementary school-based mathematics facilitator in a large urban school board outside of Toronto. I was working with 3 schools selected by the Ministry of Education in Ontario to receive intensive support in math, and I'm currently on secondment within the province of Ontario.
Hi, everyone. I am Jordan Rappaport, and I too was working as a regional elementary school-based mathematics facilitator in the same school board outside of Toronto. I was working with 3 schools as well, selected by the Ministry of Education to receive intensive support in math, and currently I'm working as an equity consultant in my school board. So as school-based mathematics facilitators, our roles were made possible through intensive support funding from the Ministry of Education. There were a variety of criteria considered, but ultimately schools qualified for a school-based facilitator to support math teaching and learning in the building. We also supported professional learning across our district as well as in our own schools. So now that you know a little bit more about these roles, we want to take some time to describe the work that we were a part of for the 2021-22 and 2022-23 school year. The revised Ontario Elementary Mathematics Curriculum was released in June 2020, and a year later saw the release of the Grade 9 destreamed or detracked for our friends south of the border math course. Funding to specific school boards was made available to operate pilot projects to support students with special education needs through transitions and ultimately the destreamed or detracked math course in Grade 9. Our work through this project centered on the following: analyzing the use of high-impact instructional practices in mathematics, support for mathematics educators in their practice, developing student agency, building mathematical identity, and narrowing opportunity gaps, and identifying practices most effective for students with special education needs in a destreamed environment. Destreaming has been a priority in our school board for over the last 4 years. And this has included many things, such as the interrogation of programs and practice with the goal of keeping pathways open in order to provide access to all opportunities to all students. Past practice has seen many students, such as those identified with a learning disability, ADHD, and language impairments, to name just a few, placed in a withdrawal program outside of their homeroom for language and or math instruction. It's from this place, withdrawing students from their homeroom for math instruction, that we crafted this book chapter about inclusion and access to high quality mathematics.
Our chapter expands on some of the approaches that we've experienced success with as ways to support inclusion. On the screen, you can see a list of actions, beliefs, and approaches that we've experienced success with, and the chapter goes through each of these in more detail. Having a culture of collaboration for both staff and students, maintaining and actioning high expectations for all learners, knowing and understanding learners, and having program alignment between withdrawal programs and homeroom programs. This includes aligning programming to include universal design for learning, the high impact instructional practices in mathematics, which is a companion document to the revised 2020 math curriculum, and using a building thinking classrooms framework for teaching and learning, which focuses on learning through collaborative problem solving. The building thinking classrooms framework is outlined in Peter Liljedahl's book, Building Thinking Classrooms in Mathematics. It has 14 research-informed practices, which can be implemented in 4 stages.
Throughout our work on the pilot project we're describing, we encountered several challenges that we had to work through. The first was how to include students who had been previously withdrawn for math programming as regular contributors to the development of mathematical ideas in classrooms. We made use of visibly random groups, which helps to eliminate social barriers and encourages knowledge mobility, with more students doing more thinking. Visibly random groups is part of the Building Thinking Classrooms framework we mentioned a few moments ago. Another challenge we encountered is one we hear about often in educational circles. We needed to find time to collaborate with educators to plan and debrief. However, without structures in place to support collaboration during the instructional day, we are often left with finding time based on the goodwill of teachers. As well, being intentional with staffing and timetabling, such that educators who are more experienced with differentiation and supporting learners with diverse learning experiences across multiple entry points have time built into the instructional day to support educators with incorporating these techniques into their practice. This model can support ongoing capacity building for educators working and learning alongside one another in the same building, and would need to be funded or creatively supported at the board or system level.
Moving forward in this work, we recommend being strategic and intentional with timetabling. For example, who's teaching what and when, thinking about incorporating common prep times or co-planning opportunities throughout the instructional day to support this work on an ongoing basis. If co-planning and or co-teaching opportunities are created, we recommend being specific with who's responsible for what during the teaching and learning cycle. We specifically recommend that educators experienced with differentiation for learners with diverse learning experiences and background knowledge have opportunities to mentor others in their buildings or their school board.
So with that, we hope you enjoy reading this chapter, and thank you to everyone for taking the time to join us today. And with that, we would like to pass it over to our friend and colleague, Dr. Hubert Breard-Smith.
Hello, you see my first slide? I'm just double checking here. You are? Okay, thank you. Thank you, Jordan and Ellie, nice to see you. My name is Dr. Hubert Breard-Smith. I am an administrator in a secondary school just outside of the GTA, or part of the GTA just outside Toronto, just north in that area. I've been an administrator now for 7 years, and which brought me to this chapter in this book when I saw the call out for chapters. So we're really looking at queering principal leadership in most troubling times. Silence is seldom the answer. So before I continue, I want to acknowledge my two-spirited identity as a First Nation Mapuche, as now relegated to South America, Chile, and Argentina. The Mapuche Nation stands hopefully free. We're getting there, down there. So in recognition of my brethren here on Turtle Island, when it comes to affirming the treaty peoples, acknowledge that we are located on a land of two treaties. What I normally say after I read this at every staff meeting, and we read this every morning with our students, is moccasins have walked the land, moccasins are walking the land, moccasins will forever walk this land. So in reading and thinking about the overall collection that we have here, I really had to do an introspective as to who and how I am and who and how I am at work. Because outside in the personal area, you are who you are with the people you're with, friends, family, and so on. But when you walk into a building, when they're added a layer of leadership when it comes to how and who you are professionally, there's an added expectation of how you are as an administrator. Through a very heteronormative lens through my research, but also I had to do an introspection as to who I am as a gay person. Do I come out at work? How often, and so on and so forth. So I always found myself asking, am I a gay administrator or an administrator who is gay? So that in itself could be seen as one and the same, but they're actually quite different. And just to familiarize the audience in terms of how it works for administrators, principals, and vice principals in schools, is that our superintendents are the ones that place us. So on average, you're in a school 4 to 6 years. If you're in a school for 6 years through within 6-year block, it's very surprising. So you get moved. Once you sign your contract, you know that you will get moved every 4 to 6 years to different schools across and around the district in which you work. So having said that, this whole coming out as a school leader always revisits itself. And in my research, and in my doctoral research and subsequent chapters, I talk about how it's always incumbent on us to navigate who and how we are as gay people or as gay administrators or leaders in a building, as to, do you feel safe? Who do you come out to? Why do you come out? When do you come out? How often do you come out? So it's the who, what, where's, when's, and why when it comes to identifying yourself as a gay or queer administrator or leader in the building. So that in itself is a constant thing. You don't come out once, you don't come out twice. It's infinite, innumerable, and it's a constant. So within that scope, I remember when I first joined this school district, I set up my office and I had a picture of my now husband, and I was reluctant to put his picture on my desk. I didn't know what to do. So I reached out to a friend of mine and I'm like, what do I do? And she basically talked me into putting a picture of my then boyfriend on my desk. And I walked away, I locked my door and I walked away. And I walked away as a grown man, as a grown adult, nervous coming back to work the next day. So this is stuff that happens in us in terms of conflict and inner conflict. Not because in this specific case, I was ashamed of who I am, but because I didn't know the population that I would be serving, leading, and working with, both teacher and all educational stakeholders. So the teachers, the staff, the parents, the community, the students. So it took me a lot of years as an educator, a closeted educator, to come out as a non-closeted administrator. So when I came back the next day, the people I work with in the main office were asking about who that picture was on my desk. And I'm like, wait a minute, my office was locked. So I knew they would go into my office to check out the new digs and how I set it all up, which was fine by me. So that inadvertently outed myself. Right. So I'm constantly navigating that. Even when parents come into my office now, you see behind me a rainbow flag right there, and I have rainbow everything in here. So, and I have pictures of my husband everywhere. So it took me a while to get to the point of coming out as a school leader is very, very important. And as I've traveled this journey of not being silent, I've had many kids recognize and come to me and thank me for being visible, for being out, for being proud as to who I am, because they themselves identify as on the 2S LGBTQ spectrum, or identity, I should say, and they didn't know that they can have, as what kids have said, a normal job and a normal life, a normal career, and work with kids being as they identify as queer. Right. And they know that they can come to me whenever stuff happens, if you know what I mean. So coming out as a school leader is, it's pretty much fighting against the heteronormativity and the heteronormative stance of public education and the assumptions that school leaders are inherently straight and or cisgendered, which clearly is not true. So what do I do now as a gay administrator? Well, it's a matter of understanding where people are coming from. And in the latest few years, especially from the South on Turtle Island, there's been an increased attack or an increased questioning of indoctrination, an increased attack on trans rights, an increased attack and I was going to say an argument about Judeo-Christian rights and insert fundamental right-wing type of human rights and parental human rights when it comes to they're my child, I teach them what I want them to learn, right, and indoctrination. So as this is coming through, and I was getting phone calls from parents about ideation of gender identity, indoctrination, and so on and so forth, I took a deeper dive into two aspects of this whole thing. So social conservatism and humanism, and humanists as a way of being in terms of philosophy. So the social conservatism are the people who expect right-wing fundamental virtuistic education and leadership within the building. This is what I believe, therefore this is what you should be teaching my child. Humanism more is on the side of you can believe how and what you'd like in terms of human rights, in terms of freedom of religion, and so on and so forth, and we fight for that. But we also acknowledge the fact that not everyone has that same belief, and public education itself inherently is not indoctrination, but it truly is a vesicle and a vehicle for education of all students. And within that, as a school leader, you need to be able to have the open communications with the parents that are in front of you, and understanding that at the end of the day, everyone's the same page when it comes to what the education and the caring of the child in front of them. So how do I balance gay rights and religious rights? Well, like I said earlier, there are parental rights and so on and so forth. So moving forward in terms of just dismantling the silence is having those conversations. When a parent calls me or calls us and complains or lodges a complaint of this, I welcome the conversation, because as a queer leader, I want to be able to talk to the parents who have questions. It's called education for a reason, right? So no matter how, I say this term lightly, but in the same way, I don't how vile what they tell me. I take a step back. I plant my heels in education law in the OHRC, which is Ontario Human Rights Code, and the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And I engage in the conversation and dismantle their ignorance to re-educate them as to how and what we're doing and why we're doing it. So that in itself is creating a space in our building, and even in our system when it comes to identity of self, through a queer identity of self, and our right to exist as leaders and as children and as community members in our building. So from that, I mentioned that I dig my heels into law. So we also have explicit policies within our school district. So when the Ministry of Education mandates or legislates any kind of PPM, which is a program and policy memorandum, we then take that and interpret that into our school board's policies. And we follow that, and or guidelines, and we follow that. Of course, another level of this to deconstruct the science is support personnel through professional development. And some of our colleagues in this webinar has talked about professional development, which is huge. Time is correct, Jordan and Ellie, you're correct. And as administrators, we have the power, for lack of better words, to create the time within our school to develop and to offer professional development and learning and self-guided learning. And from that, we have staff who have different views and or different levels of exposure to the queer collective. So it's a matter of having them feel comfortable to ask questions in the vernacular, in the space, in the words that they know how. Because whenever they ask, I'm always thinking they're asking because they want to learn. They're not asking because they want to create harm. So I redirect their vernacular, their language, and I educate them as we move forward. And of course, we have the students in our building, which are really big, really huge. So when I first came to this school, it was my 4th year. It was right after COVID. And 2 grade 9 students were posting on an Instagram page about wanting a GSA. So it's a Gay Straight Alliance. So I private messaged them through our Instagram account. And I said, I'm your vice principal. I'm new to the building. Please come see me. You're not in trouble, because vice principals or principals always think, you call the kids, you get in trouble. I reassured them that they're not in trouble, but I'm interested in learning more about what they want in a GSA. So creating that space for the kids to be able to voice what they want. So we met the next day. Whenever you want to meet with teenagers, you need to feed them because food is big. So I bought them lunch, right? And we had a conversation. Fast forward 4 years, we have 3 teacher advisors. We have 65 kids in our GSA. We run our conference in the building. We were visible everywhere in the building. And the first step was to make the invisible visible for these kids. So I commandeered a small space and I made it into our GSA office. So they felt that they had a space that they belonged to. They visibilized the invisibility of their identities. So this past year, we've had an increase of kids coming out as trans, increase of kids and parents coming saying, I heard about you and your school. Can my child please transfer because they're not safe in their school in X and Y district or school? So if, using the powers that I have as administrator, powers, I say that lightly, we shift things around, we deconstruct the silence, and we break the silence when it comes to what we do with our kids, for our kids, and with our families. So in this chapter, I look back at when you want to become an administrator, what do you do now? What do you have to do? Like, not have to do, but what are your suggestions in terms of it? So as you consider, so teachers becoming VPs, when you consider it, do you do this already in your classrooms and curriculum? Are you culturally responsive to the invisibilized queer identity within your classroom and curriculum in the school? If not, why not? Right? And how do you go about doing that? The next question I ask is, as an administrator, so once you step into that role and you have that level of positionality, leadership, and power, again, power, I use that lightly, in terms of affecting change and equitable change in your building. Are you aware of the policies? Are you comfortable with, and are you able to openly discuss and defend queer topics, right? If not, then I strongly suggest that people engage in PD or do some learning or connect with other people or other networks. And the last set of questions that I ask in the chapter is engaging the stakeholders. And that's huge, especially in the last couple of years where there have been outward gatherings, basically protesting trans identity, protesting gender identity policies, and protesting the existence of 2S LGBTQIA plus identities in schools. So we need to have visible signs of the invisible other spaces. We need to, like, safe space stickers, pride flags, progressive pride flags, and be able to understand where they come from and why they are there. Explicit professional development, like I said. And of course, when it comes to the language that we share out amongst our stakeholders and families, gender binary language, or neutral language, including all families, because we cannot assume someone's identity when they walk into the room in any regard. So having said that, I'll conclude by saying that the role of administrators in Canadian schools bring opportunities that are unique in how pro-queer advocacy work evolves, how this work is situated in schools, and how this work is a cornerstone of Canadian human rights. Gender identity and sexual orientation discussions will continue. Special interest groups will argue. Students will expect advocacy and teachers will continue to need support. Administrators get to lead this pro-queer advocacy, embarking on social evolution in schools. Knowing all of this, how do we then balance our queer identities as aspiring principals, vice principals, and leaders? The reality is that our own coming out, our queer identities, is contingent on how comfortable we feel within the educational system or the school environment. As such, being queer does give us an advantage when we consider leadership. So from that, I go back to the original slide, and where in most troubling times, silence is seldom the answer. So speak up, be proud, and be loud. Thank you.
Thank you so much to everyone for your informative and engaging presentations. And also thank you so much for willing to be so open about your personal experiences. And I think I speak for all of us when I say we really, really appreciate everyone sharing their thoughts and ideas today. So thank you so much. At this point, we'd like to move on to the question and answer period. So just a reminder for anyone who may have came in late, or just a reminder in general. So there is a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. If you have questions for any of our speakers today, please feel free to send them in. You can also send them in anonymously as well, if you wish to do so. So if there are any questions, we'll give everyone a minute or two to type them in or think about them. But yeah, we'll give it a minute or two and see if anything comes in for our wonderful speakers. While we're also waiting to see if any questions come in, I thought I'd let everyone know a few different ways that you can get a copy of this wonderful book. So Transformative Change Through Educational Leadership is available on our Canadian Scholars website. We have it in a few different formats, so print, digital, as well as a digital rental. I will mention, though, that with the current Canada Post strike and situation, we are strongly encouraging people to purchase digital copies to receive immediate access. And also, if you are an instructor or a program coordinator or administrator who's possibly looking to have this book within your classroom, course, or program, we do offer complimentary digital review copies as well, which can be found on our website too. So yeah, those are, I'll also repeat this at the end as well too. Okay, so we've had a question come in. I believe it's for Hubert. So I'll just read that out really quickly. So you had mentioned dismantling ignorance during challenging conversations. Can you offer strategies that have facilitated this dismantling successfully?
Sure, and I can tell you that the dismantling doesn't come within one conversation. You walk away, they change their mind, you're good to go. It's an ongoing, and it's based on relationship, transparency, and openness when it comes to the conversations that we have. So no matter what they're saying, no matter what vitriol, I guess, or hate-based language that they're using, or their thoughts towards you, the first thing I do is ask them, what is it that you want to say? And I listen to them intently and I take notes. And then from that, depending on what is said and their demeanor, then I engage them in a conversation. If we run out of time, or if I feel the conversation itself didn't wrap up in the most positive way or moving forward, then I ask for more time. Is there a time that I can speak with you further about this? Is there an email that I can send you, all that stuff. So that way they know that you are there to speak with them about what their needs are. But also I use that as an opportunity or a vehicle to be able to educate them as best as possible. And from that, the education comes from the policies that I'm very familiar with in my district, the human rights code that I'm very familiar with in Ontario, and the Canadian Charter of Right and Freedom, right? And I do have a leg up because my doctorate is on this. So I joke around at work saying, I know a lot about one thing, right? And this is it, right? So I'm very comfortable when it comes to that. So even if my colleagues are even outside this school or this building face that, they reach out to me and I work with them in terms of how to then best discuss, negotiate, navigate very strong opinions, and just to have that notion of discussion. in the past, I should say, before I became administrator, I was the person in my previous school board that was in charge of sharing the health and sex and sexuality ed across that district, K to 12. So I faced a lot of questions and challenges from parents and families, even educators and colleagues about sexuality ed specifically. So I came into this role knowing that this would continue, and then my role as administrator, as leadership, would be able to shift and create a space within the building that best suits the needs of our allies and of our queer brethren. So I guess my answer to your question, whoever's asking that, is listen intently, listen with purpose, listen to understand, and not to reply, so that we understand where they're coming from, to be able to then navigate what happens next, to educate the person in front of you or the people in front of you.
Thank you. Okay, not seeing any other questions coming in at the moment. Sometimes people want to ask questions afterwards as well, so we'll provide all the information in a separate email afterwards. So if you want to get in contact with any of our speakers as well, we can do that. Just give me 1 second here. I'm going to reshare my screen. Okay, so we just want to say thank you so much to everyone for attending today's webinar, and a very special thanks to all of our speakers. I know they've worked really, really hard to get these presentations ready for today, and we're really eager to speak with everyone. So thank you so much. I just want to remind everyone of the discount code we have available for this title. So it is located on the bottom left-hand side of your screen. It is TCEL2K24, and this will give you 20% off any purchase you make on our Canadian Scholars website until December 28, 2024. We will also be giving away 2 copies to attendees from today's webinar, so look out for that email after your launch, after our launch. And we will also send out a video of this webinar to everyone who has been registered. So I just want to say thank you so much again to everyone for attending today's webinar, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks so much, everyone.